We're continuing to do some work on landscapes. We're going to work on this photograph of a tree in a, I'm not sure what those flowers are. It looks kind of like mustard, wild mustard to me. But anyway, we're going to talk about a couple of important things. One is having sharp pencils. The tools you work with are very important, and I know we've talked about this before, but we're going to get serious about it in class and talk about some pencil sharpening skills and techniques. So that's one important thing. Another thing is, in a landscape, one can think of the area that we look at as having three distinct sections. And the most successful landscapes incorporate that concept in some way. So the three are the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. And this is the way we see things. In the foreground, things are sharp and contrasted and have very distinct edges or a lot of texture. The midground has a little bit less. Now there is some detail in that tree, but if we were close up to that tree, we would see much more detail as we're seeing in these flowers. So we're seeing a little less detail in that middle ground. And then the background is the least distinct. Trees or mountains tend to blend into the sky. They have soft edges as opposed to sharp, crisp edges of the foreground. And the colors tend to be a little more muted. This is back here in the background is a little more muted color than this bright yellow here, which is a little more muted than these bright yellow flowers. Now we don't think about that, so putting that down in art, in colored pencil for instance, becomes challenging because we know that this tree has leaves and trunks and branches and so forth, so we tend to want to draw that, but then we have this conflict of imagery because we shouldn't be able to see that much detail back there. So it's what we call flattens out the plane. Now that flattening out the plane is a style of painting, so that is one way one can go. But if one wants to learn to paint landscapes or draw landscapes in a more representative style or approach, it's important to begin to distinguish the foreground from the middle ground from the background. So if we look at pieces of art that have done that, the classics of course, and I don't know who did this, but this is a painting and it's very beautiful. Do you see how indistinct and how similar to the sky color that background is? So it really makes it look like it's in the distance. Then these trees have some detail. Then you come to the foreground and we see almost individual petals and leaves. And so that's what gives it its sense of dimension. So I would call this the foreground, this the middle ground, and then this back here the background. Now, in colored pencil, coverage becomes a problem. In watercolor, we can take a big brush and splash those big broad colors around and get coverage very quickly. Same with oil paint. In colored pencil, if we want a lot of coverage, we're in for a little bit of patience and a little bit of time. That's just the way it is. So this is a colored pencil, beautiful colored pencil of still life. This would take a lot of very careful strokes to get these smooth, large areas. It's a little easier in still life to do what's called a vignette, to do just the subject and not put in a lot of background, as in this lovely still life image. That is possible to do in landscape as well. And again, it's called a vignette. And I can't find my example. There it is. This would be an example of that, where the artist has done what they felt was important in terms of imagery and didn't fill in a whole big square of coverage. The Chinese watercolor painters were very, very skilled at that. I would call this a type of vignette where they focused on what is, now this is close up, so this would be the foreground. It's a little hard to tell, to say what is the background and the middle ground. But in doing I would say more like foreground and background and very little middle ground. But anyway, doing this very faintly and with very little detail, focusing on what this artist felt he wanted to have pop or come forward, is a very beautiful effect. So that's another way to go. The other thing to figure out is what kind of stroke to use. And the stroke makes a difference. Now, in colored pencil, one thing that one can get that you can't get as easily with a brush and a wet media is these wonderful textures with the colored pencil. So I can imagine that this is colored pencil image. I can imagine that the artist, now this might be a mix. I do not know. It didn't say in the reference, but this might have been some watercolor background. But I can see that one could put in some colored pencil very softly back here. So here is the foreground where you see a lot of detail. Here is the midground where you see some detail but not as much as the foreground. And then the background, you can see how this tree is more in the background than this tree, and so it's closer in tone to the sky and a lot less detail. And so you really get a sense of distance in this drawing. So texture in the foreground can help to create that distinct and very contrasty look. Here's another example of that being done very nicely. Now this is called an underpainting, but I actually like it. I think it functions fine as a drawing on its own, but you can, this is colored pencil. You can see how soft the person put down the colored pencil, probably went very slowly to get this nice even tone, and then in the front went a vertical direction to get that nice texture. Of course, Van Gogh did that as well. You can see in the background here how little detail there really is. That tree is very soft edges and there's not much detail on the house. The branches on this tree are fairly loose. Then you come up close and you really get these strong marks. And again, it gives a sense of, and you can see this is the same road here that is here, but back here in the distance, very less distinct strokes. And so that's what makes the road look like it's coming forward. So again, in colored pencil, this is very similar actually to the scene, this photograph. You can see how soft and how light and how close in tone. Now tone is darkness and lightness. The trees are to the sky, and very little detail in the leaves there. And then this is middle ground, and there's detail here, but the artist didn't draw every leaf. They just basically put in the lights and darks that they were seeing. And then in the foreground, this wonderful vertical strokes to show the grass in the foreground. So again, foreground, middle ground, I would call that middle ground, and the background being the sky and those trees in the distance. So one way to figure out how to get that foreground, middle ground, and background, and to decide what stroke to use is a very important process. We've talked about this before. It's a very good way to work, and that is to do thumbnails. Now, a thumbnail sketch, it's called a thumbnail sketch because it's very small. So mostly they're about this size, and that's what size I would do, and that's what size I suggest students do. That is so small, I'm not sure you'll see it here. So I'm going to do it a little bit bigger, but it's basically to get the big shapes. So if I look at this, I'm seeing this shape in the front, this shape in the middle, and that shape in the background. And be mindful of the angles. This is ever so slightly angled this way, this is angled this way, and it's what gives movement, nice movement to the image. So I'm thinking of this area as blue and this area is green as just two basic beginnings. So I'm going to get that shape. That's the foreground. There's the middle ground. And then of course there's some rows of trees in there. And then the tree, and I'm using blue because there's going to be blue throughout here, and I'm going to resist the urge to draw a lollipop and just think of those tree shapes as varied already. And then there's a tree back here. And then I'm thinking of this top part as blue. So I'm going to, now again, this is very, very small. I'd be working really this, so this is not laborious as we start out here because it's a very small area and will help me figure out where I want to go with my larger piece. And then I'm going to call this whole area yellow. So now I've broken it down into two major areas. Hopefully you can see that. Then I have to decide how I want to get that texture in the foreground, and I'm going to use this, whoops, nope, I want green. I'm going to use that vertical texturing method that works on the side, and you see if I have a nice pointed, sharp pencil, I can get a lot of area here to put this down. So even though these flowers are round in their structure, I'm not going to be drawing each flower. So I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to go ahead and put in this row of trees just so I can distinguish it. And that is, whoops, I think I will also just indicate this tree here. And that is my basic shaping of this photograph. And from here, I can decide, now that would be a lot of coverage, so I might only do a half page if I don't have a lot of time. And in the area of the sky, I will want to be careful to just take my time and know that it might take me a couple of hours to do this drawing. I'll stop after 15 or 20 minutes, maybe get a cup of coffee, maybe take a little nap, call my sister, whatever, so that I don't get burned out, so that I can get the nice soft coverage that I want back there, so that when I get to the foreground and I want this really detailed stuff, it's going to look quite different from the soft part. But in order to get that distinction, those two different techniques would need to be employed.